Welcome everyone, Costini here with a discussion about Total War Warhammer 3, Shadows of Change for both Immortal Empires and Realms of Chaos. And of course to talk about the massive controversy that has surrounded this DLC ever since the price was announced. And we finally have a response, a belated response from Creative Assembly, which isn't a good response. Spoiler alert, they're steaming full speed ahead towards Iceberg instead of reversing, changing course, doing something to change what they're doing. I do have to wonder, did they not think this was going to be a problem? Or did they know, or at least the PR and marketing guys knew, and yet they ignored it and tried to get away with it? See, this is the thing that's really annoying about this, beyond anything else. It's like, you're going to do something that's controversial. And I say this as someone who works on YouTube, and I have made controversial videos in the past. When you're doing something that's controversial, the worst possible decision to make is pretend as if it's not supposed to be controversial. No, it is obviously going to be controversial, and you should have had a plan in the first place, but it seems like Creative Assembly is being very reactive here. Maybe their internal thought process was, well, we charge €25 for Forge of the Chaos Dwarf. Surely we can do it for Shadows of Change. No, you cannot. Because it's one thing to ask that for a race. It's another thing to ask that for a DLC. And there are plenty of people angry with Forge of the Chaos Dwarf. So either the people in charge of PR and marketing and the people who are figuring this out were asleep at the job, or they knew it was going to happen and they did it anyway. You can decide what's worse about that. But also I need to mention this before I get into Creative Assembly's response over here. If you think what's happening right now is a shit show of biblical proportions for Creative Assembly, and make no mistake, this is probably the biggest scandal they've had since the launch of Empire, or certainly the biggest since the launch of Rome 2. But if you think this is a major scandal, you would be mistaken. Because Kislev, Cafe, and Singe, for all their fans, including myself, I do like Cafe and Kislev specifically. But for all the fans that Kislev and Cafe have, they are not the most popular factions in, or races in, Warhammer Fantasy. However, the DLC that's coming right after this one does have two of the most popular races in the entire setting, by far. And that is, of course, the Empire and Dwarves. And let me tell you this, if they treat Thrones of Decay in the exact same way as they've treated Shadows of Change and the races, lords, price, based on everything we have publicly available, because we have the trailers, we have information from various YouTubers that are able to share that information, it isn't a great situation based on that information. If they treat the Empire and Dwarves specifically this poorly and they charge as much, that might be the straw that breaks the camel's back. And make no mistake on this, if Warhammer Total War ends up dying because people aren't buying the DLC out of sheer rage at Creative Assembly, which might very well happen after Thrones of Decay, then that's kind of it for Total War. Pharaoh looks like it's going to die right out of the gate. They have no other game coming out. Three Kingdoms is gone. Troy died on launch. Thrones of Britannia died on launch. What else does Creative Assembly have? Like, if this is it, if they fuck this up, and it seems like they are going to fuck it up, then that's kind of it. Not just for Warhammer Total War, but potentially for the series as a whole. And that would be a really sad state of affairs, as I see it. But no, they're steaming towards that iceberg. And unlike the Titanic, which at least tried to bloody dodge the thing when they noticed it, they know it's there, but they're going with 100% power behind them, full steam ahead, right in the middle of it. It is going to end as well as you think it will. So with that said, let's look at Creative Assembly's statement from Rob Bartholomew on the official Total War Discord. He's the Chief Product Officer at Creative Assembly, and he thanks us for making our voices heard over the past week. And that hopefully long-term Total War fans know that even when we're quiet, we're always listening to everything you have to say. Long-term Total War fans are frustrated by the long periods of silence that Creative Assembly has been known for First off, let's just mention this. As someone who's played this series for almost 20 damned years since Rome 1 came out, and I think that has been close to 20 years. As someone who has played this series for that period of time, no, your communication ability, Creative Assembly, is piss poor. I don't know what your PR and marketing teams are doing. I do have to give credit to the community managers, at least the ones I'm dealing with personally as a content creator, but the way they communicate various things is not handled well. But moving on. They talk about the reveal, okay, and he gets right into it. Costs are up. Unfortunately, that means prices have to rise. We know any increase is going to be tough, which is why our prices have remained fairly stable over the past few years. The downside is that any increase today is going to be more noticeable, and that there's no good time to increase prices, and we have not taken this lightly. However, this is a business reality of supporting Warhammer Free, ensuring we're able to offer years of extra content that are currently planned. Okay, let me answer this. This is bullshit. I kind of wish I had the clip of Arnold with his infamous bullshits, but yeah, this is bullshit. Let's talk about costs. Any government, any organization, any company, any business has had increased costs over the last couple of years. But here's a fact. Do you know where companies spend the vast majority of their money on? For the vast bulk of them. There are exceptions, of course, in every field, but the vast majority of money that gets spent for either governments, organizations, businesses of any type is on people, salaries, pensions, healthcare. That's where the money is spent. That's where the vast majority of money is spent. Just to give you an example, because it's one I'm very familiar with, over 80%, probably more so, of the entire US military budget is not spent on equipment. It's spent on personnel. So their salaries, their healthcare, their pensions. That's what it's spent on. Just to give you an idea. It is similar in companies, it is similar in governments across the board, regardless of which department you're talking about. Now, the price increase is around 60% from the Champions of Chaos DLC. I'm not going to compare it to the Forge of the Chaos Dwarves because that's a farce. It's a 60% price increase or so from Champions of Chaos. Have Creative Assembly salaries risen by 60% over the last year? And keep in mind, Champions of Chaos was already a, $2 or $3 price increase compared to previous DLC. So it's not like, oh, the prices had stayed stagnant and then we increased it for this DLC. No, you increased it for Champions of Chaos, and now you're increasing it again by 60% from that point. That's why it's bullshit. There is no universe in which Creative Assembly's operating costs, unless they hired a significantly higher number of people, which seems dubious at best, there's no way their operating costs have risen by 60% to justify this price increase. There were certainly issues that company faced during the pandemic, absolutely, because the change to work from home, the impact that had on development, the price of hardware, the support they had to give individual people working for their company. Sure, there was a significant price paid for that. But do you know what also happened during the middle of the pandemic in 2020, 2021, 2022, even if you want to go there? Do you know what happened there? Gaming companies, and IT companies in general, recorded record profits. Far more than they spent. They made a bank. Like, you have to look at Nvidia, how much money they made, for instance, during the middle of pandemic. And you gotta understand, this is across the board. I can't think of any game developer that didn't make bank during the pandemic. So this is why this statement is utter bullshit. What's really happening here is two things. One, they want to maintain their profit margins that they had during the pandemic, or they certainly don't want them to drop as they were before the pandemic, or even worse, because obviously inflation. So certainly costs have increased. I understand that. But you cannot justify a 60% price increase on inflation alone. That is utter rubbish. So it is greed. It is profit. Two, the second thing, I've said this again and again, I'll keep saying because it is, from my perspective, something that makes sense. Creative Assembly did not want to release Immortal Empires when they did. You have to look back Warhammer 2, how long they took them to release Immortal Empires. Now people say, oh, they should have known. Yeah, they should have known a lot of things about Warhammer 3. They fucked up. Plain and simple. They fucked up across the board. Realms of Chaos is a shit show. It has been since day one. The races, lords, characters are a disaster. The map is broken. You can name 100 different issues with Warhammer 3. They screwed up in numerous ways. Absolutely. But because they screwed up, that completely derailed their plans, their initial DLC plans. It took them a while to build a roadmap, had to spend a lot of time rushing development of Immortal Empires, for which we have so many issues to this day. But that's what happened. And what's really happening here, they're trying to recoup the costs of the lost profits they didn't have last year because they had to rush Immortal Empires instead of just releasing DLC every 3 months, 4 months, how fast they wanted to do it initially, and also developing Immortal Empires on the side. That's the first thing. The second thing, they're just greedy as fuck. That's basically what's happening here. And you can argue with me on this, but you have to be naive to an extreme level to genuinely believe this statement. I don't understand why companies just flat fucking lie about this. And yes, I am accusing Creative Assembly of flat out lying with this statement because it is no way that this is a real justification. Sure, if you read the statement in a certain way, you could say, well, it's accurate, right? Prices have increased. Yes, they have. Things have increased. Sure, we can accept that. A $20 price point, I could, live with that. Many people wouldn't, but I could accept that. $25, you're being greedy, Creative Assembly. And then we have a statement from Rich Aldridge, the senior game director. And they wanted to break the mold of past DLCs to ensure we could bring you as much content variety as possible. And that restricting their products to a single race or faction hasn't always met your expectations. We hope this will improve the pace at which we'd be able to get content to you, which has been a challenge. The Changeling plays like no other. Then he talks about Yon Bo and Mother Stankia. Okay. Offers a host of fixes, and he specifically mentions Croxigar, Bretonnian Vows, range units no longer running Hearth first in melee when out of armor. Okay, so he talks about a number of things. The only thing I agree in this entire statement, I might add, everything here, is to the call to stop directing abuse and individual team members. Don't harass Creative Assembly community managers or the people that work on the forums, because they're not the people who are making these decisions. They don't have the power. Hell, they probably don't even have the information behind these decisions. They have to ask for it when shit like this happens. Though I have to wonder what the hell those people, the community managers, the PR and marketing departments, because they likely knew what the price was going to be before it was announced. How did they not see this happening? But don't harass those people, because you're not achieving anything. You're harassing people that have very little to do with the actual decision making with respect to this. But let me say this with regards to the pace of previous DLC and why that's also bullshit. Sure, they're trying to be very ambitious with the pace of the DLC. I get that. But they're also trying to portray this, oh, look at us, we're releasing free Legendary Lords. You mean what you've done in the past for a much cheaper price? And while granted, some of those Legendary Lords may have been free and came alongside another DLC pack, Twisted and Twilight had free Legendary Lords. Ooh, sure, it didn't cover free races, but it did have free Legendary Lords that each had unique and distinct playstyles. Queen and the Crone, also free Legendary Lords. Again, one free, a Leaf and R, but then you also had Hellbrand and Alariel. Again, unique playstyles and existing races. Now, granted, this is the first time they cover free individual races, but, well, let's just say that based on the footage I've seen on YouTube from various content creators, there's a lot that has been left to be desired with regards to what they've done. I guess we'll see with Mother Stankia when they talk about her, but suffice to say, there's a lot that they haven't done. So all of this, utter bullshit. Now, to understand how far down the rabbit hole we have to go here, let's take a look at the previous DLCs that Creative Assembly has released in the past. You had the Forge of the Cast Wars, which was a major rework of terrain and the addition of a new race that is arguably the most complex race to play in the entirety of Total War Warhammer. It was a great campaign, great race, great design. And it was the same price as Shadows of Change. Champions of Chaos, 16 euros. Now keep in mind, some of these prices are not necessarily accurate. I imagine there have been some price reductions, though not necessarily as many as you might think. Some of these prices are exactly the same as when they originally came out. The Blood DLC, yeah, that's always been terrible and will always remain terrible. I've been saying that since day one. Ogre Kingdoms, 12 euros. Terrible DLC, terrible race, but at least it was a free pre-order bonus. Silence in the Fury. A major rework for the Beastmen. A really powerful legendary lore for the Lizardmen, regiments renown, units, you name it. Made the Beastmen from a joke to a really good race. Also included Foric Ironbrow as a free legendary lord and a small rework in some ways for the dwarves. Nowhere near what they needed, but some quote-unquote improvements. We can argue how many improvements there actually were, but at least they were changing some things. Twisted and Twilight. 2 legendary lords, also Draika, so free legendary lords, so not for free individual races. Access to the Wood Elves without having to pay for the Wood Elf race pack, similar to how you can access the Beastmen without owning the race pack through Silence and Fury. And a great deal of effort put into the Wood Elf rework. Also, Fraught Unclean, which is a pretty solid legendary lord, for less than half the price of what they're asking. Shadow and Blade, 2 powerful legendary lords, incredibly powerful legendary lords, though I'm not too fond of Malice Darkblade, but still 2 powerful legendary lords. And I believe this was also the time that Emmerich came out. Hunter and the Beast, 2 legendary lords, as well as a small Imperial rework. Again, not enough and caused more issues than it was worth. Prophet and the Warlock, the essential DLC for Skaven, as well as a legendary lord for the Lizardmen. And the regiments around for both races. Curse of the Vampire Coast, Queen and the Crone. I think this DLC could be compared the most to Queen and the Crone, because based on what we've seen so far on trailers, footage, as well as what YouTubers have shown us and talked about, it doesn't seem like we're going to get the major race reworks that we've wanted. Now, Prophet and Warlock didn't necessarily include that, though we can talk about the importance of the Skaven stuff in the Warlock part of that DLC. So this is most similar to Queen and the Crone, a DLC that's less than half the price. Released, half a decade ago? That's how far you need to go to have a DLC that's even comparable. Also, this DLC contained a Leaf and R. Now, again, no major racial reworks, but 3 unique campaigns, very unique campaigns when we're talking about the Leaf and R and Alariel. Really powerful, great deal of power, good value proposition overall for all of the DLCs, except Hunter and the Beast, I'd argue, and Ogre Kingdoms on this list, and of course the Blood DLC. You have to go back to Warhammer 1 to see a DLC that's worse, like King of the Warlord, Grave, Call of the Beastmen, Cast Warriors, to see stuff that's worse. This is probably the worst DLC, I imagine, not certain, but I'm just speculating right now, really, but this seems like it's shaping up to be the worst DLC since Warriors of Chaos for Warhammer 1, which was a pre-order bonus. That's how things are right here. Or it's at least on par with Queen and the Crone DLC for Warhammer 2. That's the value proposition. And that's why Creative Assembly's statement over there is bullshit. Now, they can ram into that iceberg at full speed, or hopefully with Thrones of Decay, they change things around. Lower the price, give us better value, do a better job. Hell, do a better job marketing. The trailers for the Shadows of Change DLC have not been great, or at least the gameplay previews. Like, compared to DLCs, for the Chaos Wars, the gameplay previews, they gave us a lot of information about how the race worked. They showed us different playstyles. They showed us the Free Legendary Lords in detail. There was so much detail in those gameplay reveals. For Shadows of Change, not as much, which is very concerning and has been concerning for me for quite a bit now, because it's like, what are you trying to hide, Creative Assembly? Well, I guess we'll find out, if we haven't already. Costin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.